Welcome back, everyone. If we did not meet yesterday, I'm Elizabeth Bramson-Boudreau, the CEO and publisher of MIT Technology Review. In this final chapter of the day, we're going to examine new ways of working, and you'll shortly hear from GitLab and Salesforce on their strategies regarding remote work. But first, we have a word from our sponsors, Deloitte. They're here to share some research and thoughts on workforce ecosystems. To lead the discussion, I'd like to introduce Steve Hatfield, Deloitte's Global Future of Work leader. Steve, please, the stage is yours.
Thanks, Elizabeth, and thank you all for joining and welcome to our session. We have an exciting discussion for you today. Deloitte recently partnered with MIT Sloan Management Review for our 11th year of a collaborative effort and released our second report in a multi-year series on the future of the workforce, something we're very proud of and committed to, particularly given COVID's role over the past year in raising this issue to the top of the C-suite agenda. In the research, we surveyed over 5,000 business executives, managers, and analysts from global organizations to understand how the relationship between organizations and their workforce is evolving and how they approach strategic workforce management issues. We bolstered our survey with 27 interviews with C-suite and other executives, academic leaders, and other subject matter experts. And over the last 2 years, we have identified and introduced 2 groundbreaking ideas on internal opportunity or talent marketplaces and on workforce ecosystems. I would like to quickly acknowledge the authors of the report. So first, Jeff Schwartz, Deloitte's former US Future of Work leader, who just retired from the firm, but hasn't gone far. I believe he's tuning in today. Liz Altman, an assistant professor at the Manning School of Business at UMass Lowell and a guest editor with MIT Sloan Management Review. David Kieran, executive editor for the MIT Sloan Management Review. And Diana Kearns-Manolatos, a senior manager with our Deloitte Center for Integrated Research. Which leads me to introduce our panelists. Joining me today, we have Robin Jones, who leads our workforce transformation practice and was also a primary editor in the report, and one of the executives who helped shape our report through the interviews, Susan Toyhama, Executive Vice President and Chief Human Resources Officer at Ceridian. Before we get started, I'd like to mention that you can access the research findings we're about to discuss within the Files tab on the right of the screen. So let's get started. We have a polling question. As we start, we want to know what percentage of your workforce includes some external workers. Examples include contractors, service providers, gig workers, app developers, and software bots. Click on the poll tab to the right of your screen to access, and we provide you with different choices: 0 to 25%, 26 to 50%, 51 to 75%, 76 to 100%, or I don't know. While everyone's voting, I want to share with the audience the definition of a workforce ecosystem. So we define it in our research as a structure focused on value creation that for an organization that consists of complementarities and interdependencies. The structure encompasses actors from both within the organization and beyond, working to pursue both individual and collective goals. Simply put, you have people, both internal and external, you have humans, you have technology, you have your internal organization, and you have external organizations, and they're all working in an integrated, independent way. So with that background, let's get to it and pull up the polling results. Robin, I'd love to get your perspective here on the results.
Thanks, Steve, so much, and thank you for hosting us, Susan and I, today. I actually cannot see the poll results, so I'll ask you to prompt us as they're coming in. But I will say, in the research, we certainly found 87% of the respondents define their workforce in the broadest term, as you just defined, Steve. Full and part-time, contractors, gigs, freelance service providers, even bots. We also found that 33% of respondents are expecting to rely much more on external participants in the coming 18 to 24 months. But the real finding was that 28% are sufficiently prepared to manage a workforce that is relying on more and more external partners and participants. So therein lies the gap that we framed in this research, that a growing workforce is going to be evolving externally along with the internal growth plans, and yet the workforce management practices, the systems, the processes, the tools, and the like are not geared to support that expansive workforce segment.
So Robin, what's driving this workforce change?
Well, several things, 4 big shifts to be sure. The first one is the nature of work itself is changing. We're moving from a heavy process-based model to projects, teams, work outcomes. And in that is the constant pursuit of new skills and moving people internally, externally in a more agile, dynamic way to meet the needs of the business and to do new kinds of work. The second is workforce preferences are shifting. And we saw this extensively. We saw the buildup with COVID and the pre-pandemic, and then it just became a shining light on this fact. And as we're working our way to the new hybrid models, we're seeing that the needs and wants of the workforce are clearly front and center to everyone. More flexibility, more mission-driven, more purpose-driven, more personalized experiences, and more freedom. And if the organization gives them a one-size-fits-all model, they're going to find other ways to pursue their passions. The third one is that we have technology transforming how we engage and manage the workforce. We've been seeing for a number of years the inordinate flow of VC funding in the human capital space going into AI and technology companies. And we are also seeing each one of your big HCM players innovating most in this space of how do we engage and manage the workforce in a more productive way than beyond just put in the core HCM system, which many organizations have already gone to. And then the last one is workers consider themselves really to be free agents now, whether they're permanent employees or they're not permanent employees and they're in that freelance model or external model. So the mindset shift has certainly been seen across the spectrum, and that free agent mindset is something that we have to watch for. I think the other thing, Steve, is this notion of ecosystems. You know, we really got into the research after, as you mentioned, we did last year with MIT SMR opportunity marketplaces and talent marketplaces. And as I mentioned, the VC funding that has gone into this market, we saw it very much in the talent marketplace space to engage and manage workforces differently. This is after 2 decades or more of companies putting in ERP systems and kind of getting the core infrastructure into their back offices. Well, at the same time, 20 years ago, roughly actually almost 30 years ago, ecosystems as a business concept really took off. And so our business leaders have gotten comfortable with the notion of running a business, formulating strategy in the context of ecosystems, thinking about outside partners and doing products, work, customer experience together. And so it was a natural segue when we stepped back this past year to say, you know, ecosystems is here now in the form of workforces, enabling workforces, connecting workforces. And we think it's the perfect time to really look at your organization through that lens.
Interesting. So in some ways, we've already been working in an ecosystem fashion, but we haven't actually, in a sense, realized it or even optimized it. Susan, let's bring you into the discussion. Given the position you're in the marketplace, working with a number of different companies, what are you seeing organizations do in changing the way they think about their workforce?
Yeah, well, thank you, Steve. And look, I will follow along with a lot of what Robin has just said. So, it's really interesting. So, we know that even before the pandemic, that things were changing quite quickly, right? There's emergence of certain trends which we knew were inevitable, but the pandemic, as we all have seen, has accelerated a lot of those. And one of the things that I am, keenly focused on now is this really kind of drastic acceleration of elastic hiring, sort of what we're calling elastic hiring, which is really that adoption of the tenets of the gig economy. It's the tenets of the gig economy, but within your four walls, or, to be very honest right now, within the virtual four walls of all our businesses. And it's going to drive this sort of fundamental change between the employee and the employer relationship. For years and decades, there was this fairly static employee status, right? Most people wanted a full-time role. That was their goal. That was their aspiration. That's actually changing. So it's changing to something which is more sort of, let's move to hiring for projects. Let's start to move more people around the company. Let's take a look at the skill sets that employees have, that talent have, and let's align them with the company goals. Let's align them with, with a lot of the projects that are happening and the way the company is moving. And it's interesting because it's not just what the employers need going forward. It's actually, and I think to Robin's point a lot, it's actually what employees are looking for. They are looking for more flexibility in their workforce. And this sort of notion of sort of shared talent, sort of sharing soft skills, it's no longer, a nice to have. I remember the days when managers would say something like, "Oh, you have a little bandwidth. Why don't you do a cool little job rotation and it leads to nothing?" Those days are gone. It's an imperative now moving forward that we start to think about our talent marketplace as more of a kind of a project-based talent marketplace. So, the impact to HR functions, regardless of sector, regardless of geography, it's really going to be influential. It's something that I'm thinking about in Ceridian in terms of our workforce.
So interesting. So it implies this sense of dynamism, this fluidity, right? This dynamic sort of ongoing model, if you will. How does that play through with you and your clients?
Yeah. So, sorry, I think you can hear my dog barking in the background, so my apologies. So flexibility and fluidity, the nature of work, right? The nature of the way employees work and the way employees will want to work is absolutely more fluid. We saw with the pandemic that this notion of fluidity actually became more mainstream. It had to become more mainstream. We were driven to this because of this need to react very, very quickly to the changing environment, to the changing the way that we had to actually all coalesce around this new world that we were in. So you think about a couple of different industries. So let's take a look, for example, at professional sports, right? So last March 2020, live sports stopped, everything stopped. And there was this massive need for a talent pool that could pivot that operating model from live in-person sports to something around, teams playing in a bubble. And it required this different approach to the talent, what we needed, what the skill set was needed, and how they distributed it. And they had to look to their internal organizations to see what skill sets they had, to fill in those gaps, and to pivot incredibly quickly. So that's one piece of things. The other thing is, look, we are here today in a virtual conference. Most companies, if you look at events, they use conferences and events as building pipeline, as looking to revenue generation, and they do that all around the world. And again, last year, everyone basically had to pivot overnight to a virtual event conference model. Mm-hmm. And not all businesses, not all event organizers were really kind of equipped with the skill set or the experience to do that. And so then they had to do that. They had to meet that need, had to really look externally to do this heavy lift externally from talent. That pivot, that sort of very quick workforce pivot is now really a requirement. It's not a contingency. It is, what do we need in this environment? Where are we getting that talent from? How do we do that quickly? And it's really kind of, I don't know, dare I say, sort of upending that notion of what is conventional talent? What does a conventional sort of talent environment look like? So you can see from even those two examples of how both internally and externally companies have had to pivot on where they get their skill set from and where they move their workforce.
It's a great example. I mean, can all relate to that. It's what transpired for many of organizations across the pandemic. Robin, in your discussion with clients, and you've been having quite a few, what are some of the big ahas that you see regarding the impact of workforce ecosystems that they're having?
Yeah, and it's funny or interesting, I guess, in the interviews for the research, we did over 24, and then we're playing this out in the market as well. And the question we asked everyone was, can you tell us about what all your workers who deliver value, who create value for your organization? And the words we got back was, oh, it's interesting, concentric rings, it's a continuum, it's a patchwork, it's a community. And they went right to organization structure and organization design. And so we probe on that and we ask, do you know who they are and how do you organize them? And workforce ecosystems actually is a really great opportunity to think differently about your structure and bring the different groups together. You certainly have to identify who they are. But when we talk to companies or organizations like the US Army or the Mayo Clinic, these are very mission-driven organizations. And it is dear to them that they think absolutely holistically about everyone around the perimeters and beyond of their organization that's delivering value and leaning in. It's those families that support the Army personnel that they think about. And so they have to create the technology, the platform, the engagement with everyone beyond the core workforce. Same thing at the Mayo Clinic. When they bring all the innovation and the research and the patients and the doctors and the networks of the hospitals all together, this is for a mission driven. And so all the different actors, if you will, in that arena have to be considered. And how do you bring them together? How do you engage them? How do you pull them into the mission of the organization? And it goes right to organization structure. So then we follow up when we ask, well, who orchestrates that? Who leads that totality of the workforce? And that's where it's clear there's not a distinct model. Some have HR leading it. Some have the COO leading it. Many are just starting to ask the question, maybe we should have one person or one role on the leadership team lead it. But it's been very, very fragmented, and it's a real opportunity to really be intentional about where in your how you're going to structure the totality of the organization, how you're going to set up the governance, and really play this forward. And it really shows up in all the workforce management practices as well.
So, Susan, in addition to org design, as Robin has just pointed out, right, we consistently think about these practices across, you name the area, workforce planning, talent acquisition, performance management, comp and rewards, career pathing, learning and development. I'd be curious, pick one and talk about how it needs to change relating to these shifts we're sort of exploring.
Yeah, look, let's talk about learning and development. I think the conversation today goes from this sort of traditional, what was a traditional model, a, dare I say, sort of more rigid model, to more flexibility, more fluidity, more options. Robin talks about, employees being free agents, for example. So let's take a look at that for a second. If I think about a traditional, learning and development platform, it is training is provided for specific job requirements. There's a compliance aspect always, right? Security training is done. A lot of times the manager will then nominate an employee to go and do a higher level of training. There are lots of corporate requirements that are all regulated that we needed to do. And then you also have sort of these very, siloed, functional, divisional trainings. And it can all seem very rigid and very conservative in some respects. So this actually starts to transform when we start to talk about this comprehensive sort of workforce ecosystem approach, right? So when you start with, in the future, what are the organizational needs? How is the business changing? How are strategies changing in the business? What are the projects we need to do over the course of the next year or so? And then what skill requirements do we need? And do we need them internally from the workforce, or can we find them externally? And so then learning and development starts to focus on, let's align some skills. Let's align the capabilities. Let's look at these competencies. And it's interesting also if you flip that, not just from an employer perspective, from an employee perspective, employees are looking for less traditional, more option-based learning opportunities. It's actually becoming interesting, a real non-negotiable benefit for employees, as we talk a lot about the employee experience. So we did just recently a Pulse of Talent survey. And interestingly, it showed that the primary source for learning and development among this global workforce that we surveyed was actually the employer. So it ranks above, professional associations, formal education, trade schools. They're looking to the employer to give them those updated sort of, just-in-time skill building. And so there's a lot of change happening. It's not going to be necessarily manager-driven. There is a high degree of employee-driven options that we're going to need to develop, and it's going to be the absolute expectation of employees. So saying that, what we also need as we talk about technology is a really good integrated sort of workforce analytics platform, because we need to understand and we need to be able to capture what are those skill sets of our employees, what are the learning requirements that we need, and then we need to sort of track the progress against it. I mean, you can take a look at, I mentioned sort of just-in-time skill building. So, you have someone internally who's got sort of 80% of the skill sets needed for a certain project in a certain area of the company. And there's just sort of 20%, dare I say, that, that we have to look at and we've got to do some development for. And so you've got to start to create micro skill building curriculum. Okay, here's the couple of classes that you need to take in order to build up the skill in order to make you successful for this project. And then the other piece of that, which is interesting, is this focus now around sort of micro accreditations, right? These short bursts of skill-based trainings and learnings. So if you look, Ceridian is a technology company, an HCM company, and there's a war for talent. And honestly, I think with many companies, there's a need to increase diversity. So if you look at this need to increase diversity and war in talent, and you're looking at, say, tech employees or coders, for example, we can now go and hire employees who don't actually have a specific tech background, a specific tech education, and we can start to do these micro accreditations, sort of teaching people on the job. So they don't necessarily have to have the experience, but they just have to have that desire to learn. And that helps with this. I mean, we are all going to face this new movement of talent around the organization. And how do you actually pull in people and keep them focused and successful?
Terrific. I love the way that you've brought that to life in terms of ongoing lifelong learning and the question that we're asking now about skills. So folks, we're at the end of our panel. We're at the top of it already. What one thing, a quick speed round, would you leave for the audience to take away? Robin?
Sure. I would say you have to get in front of this immediately. Really, the time is now. You need to understand who your workforce is. Need to know who they are, how they add value, what value proposition you're offering to them. They may eventually be a permanent worker for your organization, or they may continue in the mode that they're in. But really getting in front of this now is fairly urgent.
Susan?
I think the one thing that's going to be very important is for organizations to be able to adapt to recruitment and retention strategies, right? We know that things have changed. We know that office spaces have changed, hybrid work. The relationship between the employer and the employee is poised to really change. So more employees are going to start to embrace this gig economy. So how do you look at keeping a commitment to the organization? How do you have employees who are looking at multiple organizations? How do you then start to talk about touch points of commitment as your employees are moving around multiple organizations and focusing them on certain projects as they move in and out? I think that change in the relationship with the employee and the employer is going to be fascinating to watch over the next couple of years and have huge implications.
Terrific. Well, thank you both. That's a wrap for us. Before I hand it back to Elizabeth to close us out, just two quick reminders for the audience. First, please check out Deloitte's content in the partner section of the platform, and you can dive into all this research, the full report, at deloitte.com/workforce ecosystems. Also, I want to quickly call out that our co-author of the research, Liz Altman, will be running a discussion group on the topic tomorrow from 11 to 11:30 Eastern for all access ticket holders. So if you're an all access holder, add this to your agenda. Space should fill up soon as it's limited to the first 20 people. Thanks again, both. And Elizabeth, back to you.